Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Addis Dialogue with the program. I'm Shifar Raulako, and my guest today is Blessing Musariri. She's a Zimbabwean writer who has honed her skills across multiple genres. She has published poems, short stories, and a collaborative novel. And only this Once Are You Immaculate is her debut novel. We're going to talk about her work and current situations in Ethiopia and in Africa. Do stay with us. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so my first question would naturally go like this. So what brought you to Ethiopia, and how long have you been here, and how was your stay here so far?
I came to visit friends who've been living here for the past couple of years.
Yeah.
I've been here about 2 weeks so far, yes. And I've been having a wonderful stay.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've learned that your passion for poetry began in junior school. So what is poetry for you? And I would also be really happy if you kind of would recite some poems for our distinguished audience.
I think my love for poetry came because I had a love for language. I was an avid reader as a child. I read all the time. So I think just the use of language to tell stories is what captivated me. The places you could go, you know, through language, through stories. And when I was in junior school, I did speech and drama, and part of that was learning and reciting poetry. And I think that's where I started my love for that rhythm of words, the play of words, you know, arranging words in a way that tells a story but is also skillful and beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's where I started. I started writing my own poetry and started writing stories. And yeah, that's when I started in junior school.
Wow.
Yeah.
Impressive. So could you read one poem for our distinguished audience? How about that?
Okay, I've picked a poem that it's one of the first poems I actually had published. And this was published by Granta. I have to remove my glasses to read. It's called Popular Fiction.
All right.
And it's, you know, was an observation on a culture that was sort of growing of, you know, young women looking for rich husbands, rich men. I don't know if it was growing or if it's something that's always been there. But I guess as I got older and I started to see that, you know, these kinds of things are happening in the world. So I had a character in my head when I wrote this poem, a girl who is decided that what she wants is material pleasures. It's called Popular Fiction.
All right.
She's looking for love in a CLK, silver like a bullet, straight to my heart, she said. That's what I want. She smears her lips orange flame and pouts. Yes, I would be somebody then, a yard bigger than your fields of maize and tribal trust lands, and walls like those of Jericho, behind which I, sleek and spoilt, will hide from these narrow streets, endless acceptance of mediocrity. So it's just...
So you are looking in retrospect, looking back to the situation to a young woman, you know, wanting to have a rich husband and become rich?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and believing that by having all these things, she will be then looked at with more respect and not looked down upon for not being, you know, in a position of power.
Wow.
And that's a popular fiction because people think that once they have all these things, they're going to be happier and their lives are going to be better.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily the truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
So, as a person from Zimbabwe, from Harare, what's your relationship with Africa like? And what do you feel, when you see this neo-colonialist patronizing attitudes toward Africa? What kind of feeling do you have, as a person and also as a writer?
As a person, it's very strange. From my personal perspective, I don't really take a lot of it on because I see it for what it is, and I don't believe that it defines who I am. And I think maybe I have been blessed to grow up with a sense of confidence in who I am and everything that I do. So I don't subscribe to that. As a matter of fact, a lot of the time I'm sort of rebelling against it with doing, you can see it like in what I write and my work. I've had instances where writing colleagues and other people would say to me, if you just wrote a story like this, or if you introduced more politics into your work, or you made your work appeal to a certain market, you would be bigger, or you would be, more famous by now. But that's never been my thing. I've always wanted to write what I feel in my spirit that I want to put out there. So that is, when I say that I have a kind of rebellion against it, that's my personal rebellion. I write what I want to write, and not what I feel people would buy or want to see coming from me as an African writer, because we have a lot of stories that are not being told, because writers need to make a living, they need to sell books, they need to have people interested. If you want to be in the international market a lot of the time, you need to write a certain kind of narrative. And I've always kind of gone against that and just written exactly what I've wanted. And as much as I would like, the fame and the broad appeal, I don't feel that that's what my work is about as a writer. And so I stick to who I am as an African storyteller, telling the stories that I want to tell about.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, because you have to be real, genuine as a writer.
Yes.
And sometimes also you have to be, I think, oblivious to the situation, because, talking about the negative things will, add to the negative sides of the story. I think that's a positive posture on your part. Let me take you to the other questions. Also, as a writer and as a person who deeply knows the nitty-gritty of diplomacy, what is your take on African leaders, including Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's push for a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council? And what have you observed in this regard? What positive sides have you seen, and what should be done, as someone who also helps to contribute to this move?
I wouldn't feel that I could speak too much about that part of the question that deals with the African Union, as it's not something that I have been following really well. But in terms of African leaders, well, gosh, there's a lot to say.
Absolutely,
and,
yes.
I feel like one of the things that I have always upheld is that as Africans, we are extremely powerful. And as a continent, we have so much in terms of resources. And the one thing about the African Union is, for me, I feel this is something I've always wondered, why do we have all the resources and very little power in terms of world leadership? To me, that's one of the things that I feel like if African leaders were to really get together and work in a real unity in terms of economies and building Africa, I think that, we would be a force to reckon with in the world. That's the very reason some Western nations are still meddling in the
continental affairs of Africa and trying to come up with all sorts of things to keep Africa from becoming self-sufficient?
I think that that is absolutely true. And what I think is getting in the way of our progress as Africans is politics. We spend a lot of time caught up in talking and politicking and maneuvering, right, instead of actually getting work done on the ground. I've been seeing, as I've been going around Addis, that there's a lot of actual development in Ethiopia, which to me is very impressive. I'm blown away by the infrastructure that is coming up and that is already there. I'm amazed by how, the city has got areas that are being beautified. You've got plants and trees and things growing in the streets, and it's really amazing to me. And to me, that's real. That shows there is progress. And, when you go to other places, in Zimbabwe, for instance, I mean, Zimbabwe is a beautiful country, but I think in terms of seeing actual progress in terms of our infrastructure, right, I'm seeing there's a big difference between what is happening here and what is now happening back home in Zimbabwe. And, it's, it makes me feel a little bit sad that we're not a lot further along than we should be in actual terms. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up this idea, because as you know, things are changing. Africa is changing. Africa is developing.
Yes.
But the narrative by some in the West are totally different. They are still trying to, create a negative attitude, negative coverage, and things like that. So what should the continent of Africa do in this regard so that its real picture should be unfolded?
Well, I think that we're already sort of some way towards doing that in terms of social media platforms and people creating, Africans creating their own content and showing their countries and showing their own cultural perspectives with their, in vlogs. And, there's so much that is out there on social media that is now showing a different picture. I mean, if you look at, for instance, Afrobeats that's coming out of Nigeria, because of social media, everybody's now exposed to it. And this is now showing that we are capable of putting out excellent content as African creators, So yes. I think we're already on the way towards doing that, but we have to be consistent and we have to be passionate about telling our own stories. Yeah.
So Africa should come up with its own platform.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a wonderful idea.
And support each other.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Let me take you back to you as an author of a children's book and to the situation in Ethiopia and ask you this question. So as a children's book author, what's your observation of terrorist TPLF's use of children? I'm sure you have heard about that as cannon fodders, just to have their ill-fated ideas be, achieved or whatever.
Wow, that's a that's a big question, and to be honest, I would feel that I can only give a general answer in terms of the fact that children should never be used in any way to forward the agenda of aggression and negative things that have negative impact as a whole in communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. They should be in schools rather than...
They should be in schools, and they should be allowed to have a childhood. I mean, it's not always possible everywhere you go. I mean, there's so much that happens to children, but naturally, it's something that should not be happening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I believe that you're a positive supporter of Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance in general.
Yeah.
So what should African citizens do in order to see a more prosperous continent, a more powerful Africa?
I think that one of the things that I'm very that I'm very vocal about is self-accountability. You know, what are you doing as a person that is positive for your community? I mean, they say charity begins at home. That is something that is a truth universally over. You've got to do your part. Everybody should do their part. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's in small things. And it's in the small things that we make differences in our spaces.
Yes. Wonderful idea there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a poet, you know, children's book author and screenwriter. So in this journey, I think you've achieved a lot of great accomplishments. So among the things that you've accomplished, which one are the most proud and why?
Well, I think that everything I put out is my best at the time. So, you know, I'm always happy when my work gets out there. But I think I'm especially proud of my fiction novel that was published last year. This, you mentioned it before, Only This Once Are You Immaculate. And I'm particularly proud of that because I wrote it during a very difficult time in my life. And I wrote the exact story that I wanted to write, even though I knew it was a difficult story and it was very complicated. But I wanted to create a work of art because I feel as African writers, we don't always get given that same leeway as other writers to, you know, more international writers to write works of art rather than just be literary and be political and be relevant. I wanted to create a work of art, and that's what I did. And that's the thing I think I'm proudest of, that I wrote the book that I really wanted to write.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I think it's well deserved. I think I should ask you this question as well before we wrap up our discussion. What's your message to African writers, African authors, and what should they focus on?
My message, I guess, would be to always write the book, the story, the poem, whatever it is you want to write the thing that you want to write, because that is the message that you've been given to put out there. Because I find that for me, writing is actually a gift. The stories are a gift. And, you know, the reason I'm being given them is to share them. And when you share something that is very authentic, it will speak to a lot of people more than just writing what you feel people want to hear. It's better to write what people need to hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a message.
Yeah.
What a message. Blessing Musariri, thank you so much for your wonderful ideas, and I wish you a safe trip back home, and thank you for everything, and I hope you have a wonderful time here in Ethiopia.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, dear viewers, thank you so much for having been with us so far. Until I see you next time with yet another program, it's goodbye from me, Shifaraulako. Stay safe and take care.